I was backpacking through a route I'd found in the Cascades National Park. It was an out-and-back trail that typically takes 3 days one way and 3 days back. I didn't know too much about it or how popular of a trail it was, but when doing these long backpacking routes, it usually doesn't matter because you'll most likely not run into many people anyway. On my third day out, though, I passed by one of the campsites and saw a man sitting by his tent. I took a break and we talked for a bit, where he mentioned he was staying there for the night and heading to the peak of the trail on the following day. I told him that that's where I was heading today and that I'll probably see him when he gets there. I left shortly after and got to what would be my campsite for the next 2 nights. The view was something I'd never experienced before and made for a great rest day and peak of the trail for that whole day. Nobody passed through, and when it came time for night, I was still the only one camping there. As I thought back to the guy I'd met at the campsite a day behind me, who said he'd be reaching this trail peak on this day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He never showed up, though. I tried to convince myself that he might have changed his plans or simply decided to stay put for another day, but a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. In the morning, I packed up my gear and started back down the way I came. Despite a late start, I was determined to reach the campsite where the man had been staying. As I hiked, I couldn't help but notice how sore I was, which didn't make the journey any easier. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the trail, when I finally arrived at the campsite. The man's tent stood there, a solitary sentinel in the fading light. It was a familiar sight, a reminder of the man I had met just a day before. I approached the tent cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The flap was partially open, inviting me to enter, but something held me back. A sense of unease washed over me, a premonition that something was terribly wrong. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer to the tent. The air inside was still and heavy, filled with a strange, musty smell. I peered inside, my eyes scanning the darkness. The man's sleeping bag was neatly rolled up, his backpack was still packed, and his belongings were undisturbed. A wave of relief washed over me as I realized that he must have simply left early in the morning. But then I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. The man's hiking boots were still sitting outside the tent, neatly arranged as if he had just taken them off, and there was no sign of his trekking poles. A cold dread settled in my stomach as I realized that something was amiss. I stepped out of the tent and looked around, my eyes scanning the campsite for any sign of the man. There was nothing. The forest was silent, save for the distant hoot of an owl. A sense of panic began to rise within me as I realized that the man was gone. I called out his name, my voice echoing through the trees. There was no response. I searched the campsite, my eyes scanning every inch of the forest floor, but there was no sign of him. A cold fear gripped my heart as I realized that he might be lost, injured, or even worse. Just as I was about to give up hope, I saw a faint glimmer in the distance. A small light was flickering through the trees, seeming to beckon me closer. Intrigued and filled with a sense of urgency, I began to walk towards the light. As I got closer, I realized it was a headlamp, lying on the ground as if it had been accidentally dropped. The light was dim, barely illuminating the surrounding area. It was clear that the batteries were nearly dead. As I examined the headlamp, I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. Someone was watching me, and it was just then that I noticed someone watching me. They were standing not too far, just 10 yards away, clearly trying to not be seen. I knew in my gut that this wasn't the man from before, but I felt like I had to say or do something. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you need help?" They stood still and quiet, their presence as silent as the forest around them. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for a response. Finally, I mustered up the courage to speak again. "I'm sorry," I said shakily. "I'll leave." Then I hurried back to the tent, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. Luckily, I hadn't unpacked anything yet, so I put my backpack on and started walking out of the campsite. As I did, the headlamp in the woods turned off, plunging me into darkness. I walked as quickly as I could, my fear propelling me forward. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. I kept walking until I reached the next camp, which was about 3 miles away. As soon as I arrived, I reported the incident to the rangers. They listened to my story with grave concern and assured me that they would investigate the matter thoroughly. Unfortunately, the man that I had met was missing. There was almost no trace for them to follow, and out in the backcountry, it's nearly impossible to search for anyone. The person I saw out there is likely the biggest unknown that could give us answers as to what happened, though it seems like most of us are aware of the most probable scenario that took place. I had booked an Airbnb several weeks in advance in a town I'd never been to. A client I was meeting for work lived in the area, so I was only staying there for a day and then driving back home afterward. The drive was 3 hours, and when I pulled into the driveway and got out, the neighborhood it was in was very quiet. Most of the houses' lights were off, and trees covered the lawns, blocking out most of the view. The only thing I really saw was a person walking down the road. They were far down, and nothing really looked off about it, but for some reason, it just gave me a strange feeling. I went up and unlocked the door, going inside and situating myself. It was a very average house, nothing really special about it, but it was great for what I needed it for. After making my rounds and checking the place out, I opened the front door to get my other bag from my car. As I stepped onto the porch, though, I noticed someone standing in the road. It was the person I'd seen walking a few minutes ago, but they weren't walking anymore. They were just standing in the road and facing the Airbnb. As I started walking toward my car, they noticed me and started walking away. I kept my eye on them while I was out there, getting suspicious about whatever that was. They seemed to just keep walking though, continuing down the street. I went back inside and made sure it was all locked up, then opened the garage and pulled my car in just to be safe. Throughout the next couple of hours, I did a few checks outside to see if that guy was still walking around. I didn't see him anymore though, and having to get up early the next morning, I went to bed. I slept decently, waking up a few times during the night, but my alarm went off at 4 a.m. for me to finally get up. The sun was still down, so it was still dark outside, but I groggily sat up in my bed and right away saw a light coming under the bedroom door. I didn't remember leaving any lights on, though. I thought I somehow must have just overlooked a kitchen light or something. I got out of bed and walked up to the door, but just before I opened it, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the other side. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened intently. It sounded like someone was moving around at the end of the hallway. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What could it be? Was someone else in the house? I slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open, my eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of an intruder. The hallway was dark and empty, except for the faint glow of a light coming from the living room. I cautiously stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. As I approached the living room door, I heard another rustling sound, this time coming from inside the room. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Should I go in? What if there's someone dangerous inside? I took a deep breath and slowly pushed the door open, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of an intruder. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the light, and I couldn't see anything at first. I took another deep breath and stepped further into the room, my heart pounding in my ears. As I moved deeper into the room, I noticed a faint figure standing in the corner, rummaging through one of my bags. A cold dread settled in my stomach as I realized that someone had broken into my house. I froze in place, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What should I do? I could run, but I didn't know if there were others in the house. I could hide, but where? And what if they found me? I glanced around the room, searching for a hiding place. There wasn't much to work with. The room was small and sparsely furnished. I spotted a small closet in the corner and decided to try to hide there. I quickly moved to the closet and squeezed inside, closing the door behind me. I pressed my ear against the door, listening for any sounds from the intruder. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of my own breathing. I waited for what seemed like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the cold sweat dripping down my face. I was terrified, but I knew that I had to stay calm. If I panicked, I might make a noise that would give away my hiding place. After what felt like hours, the sounds in the living room finally stopped. I waited a few more minutes, just to be sure, before cautiously opening the closet door and peeking out. The room was empty. The intruder was gone. I stepped out of the closet and quickly made my way to the front door. I fumbled with the lock, my hands trembling with fear. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and burst out into the night. Just as I was about to give up, I saw a figure standing in the corner, rummaging through one of my bags. The figure was wearing a black hoodie and ripped-up jeans, which was exactly what the person I saw walking around was wearing. I froze in place, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man had broken into my house, and he was now going through my belongings. I only looked at him for a second before he turned around and faced me. He didn't look startled at all. It was almost like he was expecting me. He dropped the bag on the ground and yelled at me to stay where I was. He began making his way over, and I only had a split second to decide what to do. I turned and ran back to the room, slamming the door shut just before he caught up to me. He rammed into it and tried to kick the door down, then started messing with the lock on the other side. I thought quickly and opened a window, jumping out and running away. By the time I was able to get the police there, the man wasn't in the house anymore. My bags were gone too, of course, and to make things more terrifying, the bedroom door was opened. He had picked the lock and gotten in, so if I had just stayed and hidden in the bathroom or something, who knows what would have happened. The police seemed to think there was more intent behind this man's actions aside from just robbing me, so I pray he doesn't find me again.